unlocking your world of creativity with best-selling author and brand innovator, Mark Stinson. This episode is brought to you by White Cloud Coffee Roasters, where every bean tells a story of adventure. Visit whitecloudcoffee.com and use the code CREATIVITY.
Welcome back, friends, to our podcast, Your World of Creativity. I'm Mark Stinson. We're continuing our dive into the minds and methods of artists and innovators and creative thinkers all around the world. And today I'm so happy to welcome another extraordinary guest. She's a jazz singer, a classical composer, a theater veteran whose music and performance career spans more than a decade. Nina Worsley. Nina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Nina is also transitioning now into creative coaching, helping other women clear the blocks and unlock their own creativity, blending some healing and creative freedom and all sorts of other techniques to really express their creativity. Nina, it's so fascinating, I think, blending this performance and coaching. Maybe you can share a little bit about your personal journey, how you went from theater and singing and composing into this area of coaching others in creativity.
Yeah, I'll start all the way back in the beginning. I grew up in a really musical household always. My dad played piano for our church that I grew up in, and I was always like in the choir or in the dance team or something like that. So music was always a really cool, important part of my life. And writing music, because I also played piano by ear like my dad did. And I learned how to do that from a very young age. So music was always like my primary form of expression, even really like 5, 6, 7 years old is when I started like writing music. And then when I got into, I think because music was so natural for me, I learned about myself through the way that I would write music over the years. So when I got into the like transitional, like preteen, teenage years, I learned that there are some things I wanted to express that either I couldn't or some things were just harder to express at that point. That's when I realized like music was my form of expression, but now it didn't feel as natural. But then on other parts of those times, those years, there'd be points where I could write a song a day and have absolutely no problem with it. And then I learned when I guess we could stop over a little bit. I started doing theater at 13. So that became a new form of expression for me as well, which is, again, I did musical theater. So it's still very music focused. It was just a new avenue. And I've been doing that like pretty much full time over the summers. So for those years up until I went to college. And then when I became a music composition major, I realized those years before where I was maybe sometimes having really consistent creative flow and sometimes being able to write a song a month if I'm lucky, that couldn't really exist anymore because my professor was like, you have to give me essentially, I had to make progress on something once a week at minimum. So I can't really just not have inspiration. That's my excuse every time I go into my lesson. So that's when I realized I had to pull back and understand what it is that makes the difference in when I'm really creative and when I'm struggling to do that, and break down what that means, what it looks like, and how to work through that so that it does become like part of your work process, being able to sort of clear those blocks out.
Yes,
So overall,
that's the question that was coming to mind is like,
yeah.
what did you learn about those differences? Since you can't be inspired on demand, maybe, but what about those feast and famine kind of moments did you learn? What do you have to do to overcome that?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I learned is that whatever your creative avenue is, in a lot of ways, it is the most vulnerable version of yourself. You're presenting essentially your soul, your parts of your spirit into the world via your art or your writing or your music or whatever it is. And the points when I realized I was the most pulled back were points when I guess, subconsciously not okay with being vulnerable in that way and subconsciously blocking myself from moving forward. So when I realized that, I got to just say to myself, hey, let's check in here. Why is this happening? And it's a conversation that you have to have with yourself initially when your block starts, saying, where was I when it started? What was I thinking about? And then being able to work backwards and decipher where that blocks, where the root is, essentially. So
Yes,
that's what I learned how to do.
good. And as you mentioned, putting your soul and spirit into the work, one of the things I was reading about that sets your coaching apart from maybe others is this intersection of healing from the inside, exhibiting and showing faith in your work and the creativity. How do these kind of emotional dimensions help other artists and entrepreneurs that you work through push through these creative blocks?
So I'm sorry, can you ask the question one more time?
As you were mentioning the inner spirit of the
Mhm.
work, sometimes you have to recognize that there might be something more than just your creative muse not turned on, that you've got to access some emotional dimensions too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that the main thing that I see in a lot of people is like this fear of identity a lot. And I think that a lot of the subconscious blocks happen when you are just in a imposter syndrome cycle or something like that, where you just have to realize that I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. Like, the world isn't as scary as you think it is. And especially with people my age, it's being emotionally vulnerable is not as natural. And if you want to be an artist of any sort, it has to be a part of, you have to be okay with that. So the emotional work is essentially just telling yourself it's okay to be completely vulnerable, and the work that the art that you're working on will reward you in that.
So good. As we think about your composing work with professional and amateur musicians, I was watching a great YouTube video of you conducting a small orchestra of one of your own compositions.
Yeah.
And I think about balancing the technical discipline and really truly conducting somebody expressing the work and the raw creative talent that it takes maybe for a musician to express themselves creatively. How do you see the balance of those two? I guess from both sides of the baton.
So that's actually a really good example, because there are a lot of things that I learned over the process, not only of writing that piece, but the process of getting it. That was from my senior recital at college, because I almost wasn't really allowed to do that, because that's not really common, having that amount of people in a recital. So to as an example of, as you said, both sides baton, there was all the writing elements of it. Took me, I think, 8 months to write that
Mhm.
piece. But when it came to the putting it forward and all that, there was a lot that I had to work through, as far as pushing myself to believe that it was possible, essentially. And that's, I think, the biggest both sides of the baton issue of the technical work has to be done, but at a certain point, you have to trust in the work that was done, essentially. So some people will, and performers will have an issue of this, of essentially over training, over working themselves for a performance, and then by the time they get to it, they're a little bit tired of something. But you have to have a point where you say, I have done everything, not everything, but I have done enough that I can believe in myself and I can act as if, essentially. So I pretty much went a little bit around the rules a little bit for this, and got everything in place before I went to the person who needed to approve it, to essentially say, hey, everyone's already said yes.
It's
So all I
already
can do
done.
is need some approval. But a year prior, I never would have even been able to do that, or thought that I was essentially worthy of having an orchestra or recital. And I think that is almost more than half the battle for a lot of people that I see. Is just, you've done the work. Now you have to believe that you've done the work.
Well, and bending the rules is something for all us creatives that we're always saying, let's push the edge a little
It's
bit.
the original creative task.
There you go. Now, logistically, how did you go about? You put together the work, you composed it, all the parts, all the instruments, but then you said, I got to find the people. I got to
Yeah.
find the orchestra to perform it.
Yeah.
Walk us through how that all came together. The
Yeah.
dominoes that had to fall.
So the orchestra was essentially, it was composed for a full like orchestra, so everything essentially was doubled. But what I did was I went essentially around my school and went to all the people I know played those instruments and said, "Hey, theoretically, if I got this approved, would you be in it?" And I did that, and I had a list of everyone who said yes. And after that, I condensed the full version to fit the amount of people who I had.
Gotcha.
And then I brought that I worked with my professor on that a little bit afterwards, but I got the list of people who said yes. It ended up being 10 students, one faculty member, and two people from outside the school in that particular piece. But I essentially did all the preparation before I even had to ask anyone to say yes to it because it sounds crazy. I guess it sounds crazy, but this is all the reasons why it's possible.
And do you think anybody said yes going, I'll say yes because it's probably never going to happen anyway?
Honestly,
I've had those conditional yeses.
yeah. There was, I think, one person, or it might have been two people, who dropped out afterwards just because scheduling things. But
Right.
everyone at my school is very supportive.
That's good. It's good you get the backing. That's right.
Yeah.
I want to go deeper into some of your coaching, but maybe now, Nina, is a good time to tell people where to find some more of your work and learn about what.
Yeah, so my YouTube channel is Cabin is Created. That's where you found that orchestra video you were talking about. And I spend most of my time updating people on my Instagram at Composed by Nina. And you can also DM me there to find out how to work with me. That's how I'm reaching out to people.
Fantastic. We're talking to Nina Worsley about creativity and creative coaching. In your work with women business owners now and entrepreneurs, there's probably a mindset hurdle that you're hearing. Are there any common themes that kind of run across some of the people that they're working with?
Yeah. Like I said before, I think I'd say 60% of it is just people not understanding how far along they are. And that's something that I check in with myself with periodically of, wow, I have come really far. And I am in a position where I have to stop a person when they're talking about, oh, I can't do this because of this, and saying, let's pull it back because you do have to acknowledge that you've done a lot of work. So let's celebrate that and act with the understanding that you're not really, people think that they're at level 1 when they're actually at like level 5 or 6. So it's like, you're not there anymore. So I know you feel like you're there, but let's bring you up to speed. And it doesn't mean that you're completely ready, but you're essentially distracting yourself from all the ways that you could be improving by believing that you're farther back than you actually are. So that, I think, is a thing that I come in contact with the most.
And is there a tool or a technique or a practice that you tend to recommend to overcome this hesitation and move into more confidence?
Yeah, the first thing, like ground zero, is just making a lot of I'm a big list person. So I tell people sometimes to write down who they were to 1, 2, 3 years ago, and the things that they struggled with back then, and the things that they didn't know back then, and then bring themselves back to present day. What have you learned since then? What new experiences have you had? And then, like I said before, the example of the orchestra, realizing that when I walked into college, I never would have had any of the tools necessary to put an orchestra together like that. So if I'm ever in a position where I'm thinking, oh, I don't know if I can do this, now I can say, I already have, and I have to remember. So telling people essentially how to remind themselves, and the basic way is to make a list of all the things that you didn't know back then that you do know now, and realizing you have come very far.
I do often wonder if people are stuck with, I don't have enough knowledge, I need more skills, or I need to learn more. Or is it attitudinal? I just need to believe in myself and I need to put myself out there and know that not only I can do it, but other people are behind me too. Which are you finding?
I think that actually, it's funny that you brought that up. I actually had a conversation with a client recently about the skill slash knowledge issue, where I stopped them because they were talking about all of the things that they were struggling with and why. And the idea of not having a skill came up a few times. So when it came up a third or fourth time, I was like, okay, let's stop and talk about that. And I do think that, like the early example of like over performing or preparing for a performance, and then by the time you get to it, you're burnt out. I think people will sometimes use knowledge as an excuse for lack of action. So it's like, it's true that you do need to learn more things. We all need to learn more things. We should be doing that constantly. But what do you think that you don't know now that is keeping you from taking the action that you need to take? That's what really we need to do. So if there was a situation where I wanted to write an orchestra, but I never listened to one before, that's a skill issue that I can address. But if I have composed before, I've composed for all the instruments in the orchestra before, so I know how they all work, then the idea that I have to listen to 5 orchestras a day for as long as possible until I feel confident, that's not really the issue at that point. So it's the sort of trying to be as honest as possible about what skills do you have, what skills do you need, and is knowledge the next action or is knowledge a distraction from the next action?
So good. Listeners, let's rewind that a bit. Is it a distraction from the action? I love that. That's my new bumper sticker of the day. Because I know I probably have 5 things on my creative list. It's what's holding me back here.
Yeah,
And
because that's the hardest thing that artists have is like the start is the biggest hurdle.
there you go.
It's like nothing's gonna help you start. That's all gonna have to come from you.
And asking for the collaboration, asking for the help, asking for the support. You obviously had to overcome that, to ask for the group support.
Yeah, because our entire lives are just full of relationships and collaboration and all of that. And if you're scared of that, you're just gonna have the biggest hurdle to go over. And one of the reasons why it was everything that I've accomplished in that school was so meaningful was because of the people who were willing to make it meaningful with me.
My guest is Nina Worsley. Nina, our listeners include lots of full-time creative artists, professionals, they're writers, they're songwriters, etc. But there's a lot of people just saying, I just want to tap into my creative side more. I want to use that as a hobby or use that as a weekend, something to take my mind off the day to day. Is there another tool that you can offer us to tap into or avoid burnout or stay inspired in whatever we're working on?
Yeah, I think that the main thing is to remember that every single human being, in some way or another, is creative because that's the thing that we all have in common, the ability to be creative. So just because you're not a singer or a musician doesn't mean that you don't have a creative side. I had a conversation with somebody recently where it was like, mathematicians are creative. If you're working with people in any sort of way, that is a creative role. If you're a mother, that's a creative role. So I think that the first thing would be to peel back a little bit and think about what your role is in whatever job that you have and try to see the creativity in it. And if you want to go outside of that, then just thinking about what you gravitate towards naturally and seeing how you can incorporate that into your routine, whether it's 10 minutes a day. If you like writing music, 10 minutes a day, I'll write a little song lyric per day or listen to new music before work or after work or something like that. Just there's always a way to incorporate it more. It's just a matter of what you gravitate towards that will inform.
So good. Well, Nina, I can't thank you enough for being on the program and sharing your story and some of these creative insights with us. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
I appreciate it. That's awesome.
And I'll put all your links in the show notes so we can find you. Cavernous Creative on YouTube and Composed by Nina on Instagram. We'll be sure to connect with you. And I can't wait to keep hearing about how you're navigating, helping others navigate their path with such passion and purpose that you certainly exude. So I appreciate that.
Much.
Thanks for sharing that with us. And listeners, I want to thank our sponsor today, White Cloud Coffee Roasters. Our episodes each week are brought to you by White Cloud Coffee. Their flavor meets some of the creative inspiration that we've been talking about. So you can enjoy a 10% off your first order when you use the code CREATIVITY at checkout. Just visit whitecloudcoffee.com to discover your new favorite roast. And we appreciate you tuning into your world of creativity. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show on whatever podcast app you use. And come back again next time. We're going to continue our around the world journeys, talking to creative practitioners everywhere about how they get inspired, how we can organize our ideas, and most of all, how we gain the confidence and the connections to launch our work out into the world. Until then, I'm Mark Stinson, and we'll keep unlocking your world of creativity. We'll see you next time.